Dave, welcome to the Hospital Club.
Thank you very much.
Now,
wonderful.
The Hospital Club this year is celebrating its 10th birthday, and you had a little bit to do with its conception.
Yes, it's the 10th birthday of the Hospital Club being open. There was about 6 years before that, trying to get it underway. How it all began was I used to live in the apartment down, the bottom of the road on 7 Dials. And my window looked at this derelict hospital, which was getting a bit more and more worse for wear. And I think it had been derelict about 7 or 8 years. And I used to walk around the area. I was, sort of always wandering about, and I'd noticed it was looking a bit worse and worse, and lots of, people were complaining about it in the area. Nobody was doing anything about it. Then I realized it was for sale, and a friend of mine who I'd met quite a few years before, Paul Allen, was in my apartment once, and we were looking out the window, and I was talking about the hospital, and Paul had often said to me, we should do something together, something, interesting. And this was one thing I thought, well, this would be interesting to take this derelict hospital and turn it into something that is a creative force rather than, something that's falling apart. And Paul understood what I meant. I was kind of talking about it almost like an Andy Warhol factory in the 21st century, wired to the world, linked to the community, all these kind of phrases. And I was talking about how back in the times, in Vienna, when Mahler's wife would give dinners, and she would invite, I think it says this on the website or something, but I talk about, if you put an architect on the table together with a composer and a writer and a painter, like if you go and used to huddle in the corner of the Ivy, whatever, and you'd see these conversations going on, and lots of things would come out of that and change. So Paul and I agreed, and we set forth and marched down the road to look at the hospital. Actually, years later, well, not years later, but a while later, we were horrified, because when we were walking around it in like sort of, baseball shoes and things, and they still had, operating tables and jars of stuff and hypodermics, and you had to walk through corridors that the floorboards were falling off.
Really?
Yeah, it's like this total mess inside. But we saw that, wow, this is a huge space, right, that we could do all this stuff with. And then afterwards, before they started construction, we realized these guys were going in with biohazard suits on, like spacesuits with and we said, wow, what's that? And so, you should never go in there without. And we were like, uh-oh. We've been walking around on top of everything. But you see, what's great about Paul is he understands creative people and creativity. Like he built the Experience Music Project in Seattle and stuff like that.
The Jimi Hendrix Museum.
The Jimi Hendrix Museum, which Jimi Hendrix blew his mind when he was younger. And he plays the guitar himself. And he obviously has another side of his brain, which is incredibly brilliant at stuff to do with technology and things like that. So what the hospital is actually, it's married those two worlds together. So it's, got great sort of, it's wired great, and people can come in and work in here and use all the fast lines. But it's also got this sort of heart and soul. I mean, I must say, much more since Sue Walter has been here, who was here at the very beginning and ran away for a bit and then came back
thank
again.
goodness, came back again.
Came back again.
And just for everyone's benefit, Paul Allen, who, the way you describe him, sounds like a mate you met in the pub. Paul's got a bit of a track record himself, hasn't he? Can you just tell us a little bit about his background?
Yeah, Paul. Well, the funny thing about Paul and I is when I first met him, it was at a dinner in New York, and I didn't really know really anything about Paul. And I was meeting with a man called Yuzo Atami, a very famous Japanese director, made the film Tampopo. Yeah. And I was talking to him about this film, and he'd flown over. And then Paul heard that I was recording in Hendrix's studio in the Village, and he was really excited to hear about that and asked if he could come. So he would sit in on me recording this album called Greetings from the Gutter. And
Did you know who he was?
I didn't, well, then, everybody didn't just jump and Google it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, hang on, who's this? Blah, blah, blah. I just knew, you'd been involved in creating Microsoft. Remember, I'm talking about 1994 or something like this. And
Just stop there a second. He'd been involved in creating Microsoft.
yeah, but actually,
In case anybody missed that.
there was Paul Allen and Bill Gates, and Paul was actually the guy who actually realized one day, he was actually walking past a magazine stand and he realized, wow, there was, I think it was called Science Weekly or something, and he saw something that in his mind sort of exploded, like an epiphany that if that works, and what he was thinking about worked, and if you put two and two together, it would, create a revolution. In
So
the way
Paul, Paul became a great partner.
yeah.
And you just talk about the epiphany that Paul and Bill had to invent Microsoft. What was the inspiration that you had though, Dave? What was the spark that you saw this derelict building down the road from where you're living? What was it? What was the light bulb that went on your head and thought, let's make that into a fantastic creative hub?
Not a pub, a hub.
Hub.
Yeah.
Hub, not a pub. Pub would be good as well.
A creative pub. That's the offshoot. That's called the clinic. But anyway, so.
That's something else completely.
Well, you see, for me, I think that creatives, or artists in inverted commas, have always been sort of misread in a way. It's like the words always got to get, poor starving artist, or, creatives are always these people, they're the people that you bring in when you need to do something a bit quirky, when you're running a big company. But actually, if you think about it, I mean, Britain's got actually the biggest or largest creative economy in the world. It's full of these incredibly talented people.
It's a tiny island.
On a tiny island, and, there's very few places where people meet up, and it's very sort of disparate and niche. So there's great places like Ronnie Scott's, but everybody's to do with music, or there's Chelsea Arts Club, or there's all these places. But when you get a lot of different kind of factions together, and you have, a sculptor talking to a musician, or somebody who's a great TV producer talking to somebody who's a scriptwriter, all in the same place, in a kind of, not sitting in a boardroom or sitting across a desk trying to pitch a script, but actually having a drink or something to eat, and then you get, well, I actually call it a talent brothel. Don't know if we're allowed to say that in the interview, are we?
A talent brothel. Yeah.
Well,
It's
one way of describing it. So, no, I mean, what you get is a lot of people with lots of ideas talking to each other and collaborating, because collaboration is like always been a key thing in my life. And so from these collaborations come the foundations of amazing, new creative ventures. And creative ventures, are really like the engine of what happens in Britain and in many places all over the world, where you think, oh yeah, this is a beautiful city, and yeah, because some guy sat and drew, I was on a plane with him coming here, Frank Gerrie, who actually...
the architect.
Yeah, the architect who did Paul's Experience Music project.
In Seattle, yeah.
He was on his way to have his 85th birthday in the Bilbao Museum, which he also created. But you see, I think it's really important that from the hospital now, which has spent this time establishing itself, now it's going to be a content engine, and all of the people who've been members for a while will start to sort of see, oh, actually there's a way in which our ideas can come into fruition. Hence, tonight, we're sitting on the stage where I've discovered this girl. She's just turned 16. She was 13 when I first discovered her. Is going to play her first.
Holly.
Yeah, Holly Stevenson performance in a beautiful place called the Oak Room with perfect sound system. Great place for people.
It is fabulous, isn't it?
Yeah, people to enjoy and listen with real great sound and everything. And we've got TV broadcast studio in the basement where, you could make any kind of TV program, an art gallery. Now, I think when these things start merging and fusing together and TV shows come out of here and music shows and exhibitions, all this stuff is happening at once, which I've seen many times here. It has this amazing atmosphere. It's almost like when you're a kid, and it's very exciting, and because a lot of the time corporate business is very much like watching paint dry. That's why you know, people will go to a corporate website for about half a second and run away like crying.
Yeah.
And, you know, that's why the world has been changing by the people themselves, the internet and everything, because creative people are the biggest influencers on the social graph. So a photographer, you know, doesn't matter if they're a successful photographer or not, will have a lot more people look at their works online than, you know, a person who's not creative.
So that kind of light bulb moment was basically put creative people together in a space where they can collaborate
And light a fire.
and they're actually going to light a fire. Something's going to come out of it, which obviously is what's happened here over the 10 years of the hospital. I mean, one thing which intrigues me, back then when you had that idea, Dave, London was a very different place, and the clubs that were in London, you know, we kind of take this a little bit for granted now, even though in the hospital clubs are one-off, really. But back then, it was a very different scene, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, as I say, it was very divided. Obviously, Groucho's had started with lots of different artists and musicians come together, but I was a member in some amazing
It was more
times
of a
there.
drinking den, wasn't it?
Well, it's
watering hole.
smaller and had a restaurant that was the front
Yeah.
bit, and I had some interesting times there with everybody. From Damien Hirst, I took Bob Dylan in there once, and everybody was like, but you know, it was where else to take him. You see what I mean? So then the Soho House popped up around the corner, but again, it wasn't like functioning in the same way that this functions, because this is performance spaces, galleries, TV studios, recording studio, and many different levels of bars and restaurants, all intermingled, because it's usually like, well, this is where you get drunk or you get drunk and have a meal, but this is where collaborations come together.
10 years on, what highlights, what things stick in your mind of those 10 years, Dave, that have taken place here? Or what are your personal memories, fond memories of it?
Well, I remember the very, very beginning launch, you know, when it opened its doors and it was like almost ready. And I really
almost ready.
Yeah, and I really wanted this kid on to play, and he just had something to stand on in the corner of the TV studio, and I was completely mesmerised. And I was going, this kid's amazing, just like Holly Stevenson tonight. That kid was Plan B.
Wow.
You know, so there's been moments, you know, where I've arrived with a bunch of oddball characters, and we've stayed up till 2 in the morning. And remember Matthew Walker's the great theatre director that has Matilda down the road, him pulling the sort of menu off the wall, because we were all confused. We were in the middle of trying to write this musical, and you know, it's got so many threads. And he said, hang on a minute. And he pulled the menu off the wall and sort of wiped it off, nobody complained, and started drawing the musical in sort of coloured blocks. And he was actually making, what's he called again? It's like a Japanese guy invented this for when they were building ships in Japan. He made a fishbone so people could understand like where they were in the middle of the building. Can't remember his name now. Actually, that story I put in a book called The Business Playground, which I wrote with Mark Simmons, which is in, you know, Chinese and Korean and all sorts. And The Business Playground talks about the hospital as well. And in a way, what I'm talking about is a creative playground, but you mustn't eliminate the fact that creatives create massive businesses, you know. And that one idea, you know, that, you know, if I went into a bank and I said, look, I've got an idea, it's about this alien who wants to go home and he's got a long finger, you know, usually, you go, soon you get him out of here, you know. Steven Spielberg, you know, comes up with an idea like that, and it creates this
George
empire,
Lucas,
you know?
yeah. And the club's been really successful. I think the membership's pretty much full. It's full, in fact. In terms of, you mentioned Soho House before, and one of the things that they've been very successful at, albeit a very different kind of institution, is extending that brand. They're in Miami, they're in Bangkok, they're in Berlin. Do you think the brand of the hospital club could travel now, Dave?
Yeah, it's interesting.
Could there be, I mean, you live in LA, could there be the hospital club LA?
Well, I think they're very different kind of ventures, and I think the hospital could easily open in another part of London, and in Los Angeles, and we're partners with some places around the world, in New York and places. But you see, it's a different kind of membership. It's hard to explain. I go to Soho House in LA and in London. I think these are all really well, put together places. But the element of having a performance space in it, and a TV studio, and a gallery, and all the various things that are going on inside it that are exciting for the members. A cinema, that has all the latest films coming out. There's breakfasts, talks about creativity, and there's just so many things going on. If you go to the hospital website and look at the amount of things going on in a day, that's why Sue's are getting thinner and thinner.
Now, in terms of the next 10 years, and I mean, I've known you long enough to know that you never ever settle, you never rest, you're never happy, you just want to keep moving on and moving on and moving on. You're always happy, but you want to keep moving on, doing more things. What do you think the next 10 years of the club could bring? If you could wave a magic wand, what would you like to see happening in this creative hub?
Well, yeah, it's funny, like, say, going back to sort of 1996, say, when the hospital concept was, I did a 3D sort of, how to explain it, a sort of demonstration of how I saw the world. And I kept calling them worlds, and they actually turned out to be called apps. But I didn't know they were going to be called apps. So whatever it is in 10 years' time that's going to appear online, whatever they're called, I think the hospital will be up there amongst the people encouraging talent and producing and, co-financing or whatever, these little worlds of creativity that will be up amongst everybody else, like a contender.
Yeah, and last but not least, tonight's a bit of a special night because you're showcasing a wonderful talent, a new talent, 16-year-old girl, Holly Stevenson. You've got a long, very successful track record, Dave, of discovering the most incredible voices, especially new voices, I think. Tell me about Holly briefly, just in terms of what we're going to see tonight, and the fact that you chose a hospital club to actually give her the worldwide premiere. Well,
the interesting thing is, talking about great times at the hospital, about 3 years ago, I was downstairs in the basement with the Water Boys and Daryl Hall and all sorts of people. And I arranged for Holly's mother, Shirley, to bring Holly because I'd seen her with about 33 views on YouTube singing a song that she wrote herself. And I was like, God, that kid's great. So my mind is, all right, I'm already doing this thing with about 20 people on stage. And by the way, I want to see that girl as well. She came in with a guitar in the hospital downstairs and sang in front of me and Daryl Hall. So she's here and we're there, right to our faces, these two songs.
And how old was she?
She's 13.
Wow.
And me and Daryl were like, bloody hell. And so I kept in touch. Yolanda Charles, who's playing bass tonight, great bass player, played a lot with me and Mick Jagger and various people. She's the MD, the greatest sort of players in London here behind her. And, when she was 15, I flew her to America, recorded some songs with her, and she just turned 16 2 weeks ago, and she's going to perform them tonight. How
exciting. Well, we'll look forward to that, Dave, and thanks ever so much. And thank you especially for having that light bulb moment 10 years ago, 15 years ago, whenever it was, because we wouldn't be here tonight, and nor would Holly if you hadn't done that. So
thanks, Malcolm.
Big thank you.
Now to the martini bar.
Where's the martinis?